The reason why relationship is a dirty word is that every time you try to scale within the real estate industry, there is one statement that we actually speak with pride and actually hold as a badge of honor in real estate. And that is that we are a relationship-based industry. And frankly, that is very problematic. I think in the future, as we look back, our generation looks back, the people who are going to end up in our industry 10 years from now are going to look back and question us on that. They're going to say, how is it that you could publicly make a statement that we're a relationship-based industry? Because what that really means is that you are not equal. It means it's not a democratic industry. What that means, in fact, is that it is cronyism, but it's got a little bit of a bubble around it, which we consider to be acceptable because the word we use is relationship. And this is, I think, the case not just with real estate. It is, in fact, the case with a lot of industries, which, in fact, are hard for anybody from a minority or a gender perspective to crack through. And I think it's important to understand that perspective. I have never been in the same country for longer than 5 years. In fact, the longest place I've ever been is 5 years. So I'm always an outsider. And this is just personal. I may have been born somewhere, I may have been raised somewhere, I may have been educated somewhere and set up businesses elsewhere. But frankly, I don't believe that I am from anywhere because I've always just been an outsider. I'm an outsider today in London. I was an outsider in Singapore. Frankly, I was an outsider in Bombay because I grew up in Delhi. So from that perspective, I think it's very rare that we actually think about those who don't belong. And I think the people who don't belong need to first address the fact that we need to challenge when people say that relationships are what matter. Relationship is a way of us feeling comfortable about somebody based on personal biases. That doesn't mean bad people. What it means is we're looking or we're doing pattern recognition towards people who we can trust. And you'll see that if we look at the plethora of cultures around the world, relationship-based cultures are often in places where legal constructs don't work very well, because you usually need to be able to trust a person based off, the things you have in common between them. Very often you have countries where there are legal systems that function extremely well, where there can be decisions taken based off a black and white. It's not always within this, I'm going to need the help of the village in order to survive. In those cases, it's more data driven. Now, interestingly, industries are similar. And real estate, as well as the venture capital or the tech industry, actually have a lot of things in common. They have a lot of capital that is usually held in a few hands. And that capital is very critical for that asset class. So venture capital, for example, when they write checks, they can't just write a check to anybody with a good idea. And they can't just write checks to anybody who walks across, walks through the door and says, here, I have a business that I want to scale. There's a process that goes through that, the due diligence of it. Either it is because somebody else said it's a good idea, i.e. we're again creating that relationship-based clique, or it's because you actually know this person well enough to say, I am willing to bet that you would be able to create the business that you claim you can based off how I measure you. But the I is really important, because what you're doing is you're using bias. And a large part of what we do at Traftus, in fact, focusing on artificial intelligence and data, is based off this issue, which is if you're unable to measure what is performance, then you will always come back to the fact that it is relationship based. And putting in those metrics and understanding what true performance is allows you to remove your own personal biases when actually evaluating something which is frankly your fiduciary responsibility towards your shareholders and stakeholders. And the I in that perspective suddenly is no longer important. You may like somebody, but they may not be the best performer. And I think for me, the nail in the coffin was a very poignant conversation that I had recently with a fund director. And we are having this conversation about the operators that they work with. And this is where a lot of your pension fund money eventually ends up. And we're talking about large sums of money being invested with a very small group of people. And then you ask, well, how do you know if your operator is performing? And at the end of the day, we're still coming back to the metrics of, say, IRR. But that takes a while to get to. What are the performance metrics that we're actually tracking on a daily basis? What are the performance metrics that we're actually tracking on a monthly basis to tell you whether your gut-based decision was the right decision? I mean, the scientific way of looking at a hypothesis versus thesis hasn't actually come into the industry. And that's primarily because it is a relationship-based industry. So once you've had 3 deals with the same operator, it's easier to then just go ahead and give them the other 3 deals that come through without truly recognizing that you are, in fact, giving the highest performing operator out there the opportunity to do so.